Come, let us sit and try to relate. Because now, more than ever, we must show discipline, tolerance, and production to build a strong and better nation. I say that is the main foundation. So come, let us work hand in hand, because this is our land. Come, my brother, come, my sister, and let us build a nation together. Oh, yeah,
Come, my brother, come, my sister, and let us build Grenada, Carriacou, and Petite Martinique together. I want to welcome you to the Dynamic Hour. Again, we have a unique opportunity to talk using social media and the radio to connect, to reach one another. I want to say to you further, this place belongs to you and I, to all of us, to we the people, and we must enhance it. We must transform it. We must make it better. We are in 2025, and one of our resolution must be to make this place better. And we must work towards it. It should not just be something on social media that you post. It should not just be you saying it, but it has to become a do, something that you must do. I will do this. I must do this to make this place better. That is so, so important. I want to encourage those on Facebook and YouTube to please share the live. Sharing is caring. I want to start off this morning by saying, and I'm talking about the substance of the program, by saying last night I deliberately did not come on because our beloved Prime Minister was on the Beyond the Headlines program last night. Though the program started off late, it was a organized program. The interview was well done. Kudos to Colin Dow and our beloved Prime Minister. Again, he is a master orator. He articulated on so many issues. And what you got out of that interview was a Grenadian who cares, a Grenadian who believes in his people, a Grenadian who wants better for his people, a Grenadian who is a father and who knows what it's like to bring up children and to make sure that you provide for them. That is what you got out of that interview. A caring father, one who just is dedicated to the people. And that is what you want in a prime minister. And we are getting that every single day. So I want to start off by playing excerpts, at least a piece that must be played, speaking to pension, because in some people's mind, they are not clear. They want more information. They want to understand the thing in a very simple way. They want to be able to relate to it, in other words. And who is a better person to speak to that, to explain, than our beloved Prime Minister? So I want to play that for you first and then come back to having a conversation, a deeper conversation with you.
There was some debate, some conversations about it. Who are the beneficiaries of this initiative?
The beneficiaries of the initiative are largely all government employees who are currently not eligible to the current, what I would call constitutionally guaranteed pension. Except someone who's on probation, because until you confirmed, and except one other category of workers who currently have a gratuity, and I think that category is someone who's 50 years and older and who's been in the government employment for more than 15 years, because I think a prior specific arrangement was made for.
I've heard lots of conversations about contract workers.
Yes.
And share with us, if we agree that Grenadians should retire with a pension fund that is better than what NIS offers, why should, though, the government of Grenada be spending money, 3%, on short-term contract employees, and they should they be taking care of themselves, as it were, by virtue of the contracts that they're signing, or are we admitting that they're underpaid to begin with, and hence we're using this to supplement their income? Because, for example, a business executive may not have a pension plan, but would go into a retirement savings plan with an insurance company or some other provider. These contract employees, not all are low paid at the 1,200 or 1,500. One which may argue that they ought to be able to invest in themselves, yet still we see public funds making that investment as a counterpart funding. So why is the government taking this on?
No, so you need to just, you've said a lot, so let's clarify a couple of things. If someone genuinely has a short-term contract with the government of Grenada, they are not getting a pension in the scheme, right? Because the whole nature of a pension requires deductions from the employee and the employer over a sustained period of time that is vested in the employee after a certain period of time, and that the employee will get upon retirement or cessation of employment or death, in which case his estate will get it. So for instance, if the government retained some consultant, let's give a perfect example, to assist it with the National Health Insurance policy document, and that consultant is given a 6-month contract, that consultant is not eligible to the pension.
Right.
If you just employed by the government to do whatever, there is normally a probation period. During that probation period, the pension does not apply because you're not an indefinite or permanent employee. And I said outside of that special category of workers where there is a gratuity in place.
As you develop, make the distinction between permanent employee and established employee, if there is one.
Well, a lot of this is legalese, right? And it depends on whether you're talking private sector or public sector, right? The concept of established workers is really a public sector concept, and it is essentially speaking to public officers who are defined by the Constitution as public officers, and by virtue of that definition, they're entitled to be paid a pension under very specific pension acts that have been established in law. Almost all of them were passed, I think, all the way back to 1958.
Right.
So you're talking prison officers, police officers, teachers, and that category of what I will call nondescript established central government workers, people working in the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Infrastructure, or Health, as the case may be. Doctors and so on who are working for the government. And the word established is used to identify them as distinct from a large number of other government employees who were never officially recognized either by the Constitution or the regulations under the Public Service Commission as being public officers.
So you're saying that one can work with government on a permanent basis, but not part of the established.
Precisely. And there are drivers, cooks, cleaners, security persons who suffered that fate. So let's take the cooks who feed our children in school for 15, 20, 25 years. The construct doesn't have them as established. Don't ask me, and I'm not trying to explain to the public how all of these things were created. I met them like that. And so when they retire, generally there's no pension for them. Over time, a system of paying them a gratuity has developed. And under our administration, in fact, we've moved that sum to $500 per month for people like the long list that I've just identified. But if that's all that mattered, it might have been easier to solve. Over the last 10 years in particular, and since the imposition of the self-imposed structural adjustment program, the government, and I'm not just saying the government simply because it would have been largely an NNP administration, I'm saying the government because government is a continuum. In an attempt to address the structural adjustment and to suggest that the real number of government employees was less than it actually is, would have created this system of saying we will hire people as contractors and give them the title contract for service. So that if the IMF or the World Bank or whoever is coming is going to say, well, these are not contractors, they are service providers. They're not really our employees. They're providing a service to the government at a fee. Now that would have been fine if the person was coming to cut the lawn in the botanical gardens once a month, or if the person was coming to do maintenance on a building once a week. That's a completely different thing when that person, the clerk, you're meeting at the desk every morning.
So really they're
technical, they're workers.
Right.
They're not established, because what the government would have done would have been is to hire them with documents that actually says you are a contractor.
So the government employed these people and they didn't go through the PSC?
They did not go through the PSC. Mm-hmm. And you can do that. But I'm saying the document itself is saying you are a contractor for service, providing a service to me. And I'm providing you a service fee. And you have to pay your own NIS.
Okay.
And they either give you a 6 months or 12 months and they renew and they renew. Or if you don't feel like renewing because you fret a politician or somebody, they just dismiss you. So you have to think of the implications of what I've just said. We don't even have to get into pension. You have no benefits. They're not even giving you a holiday, because if you're a genuine contractor, the man who's your plumber, who you call to do your plumbing, and pay him a service fee when he fixes your plumbing, he's not your employee, so you can't come and tell he wants sick leave and holiday pay and what have you, and compensation for damage on the job. That's completely different from the lady who you hire as a domestic, who comes to work for you every day, 5 days a week, either cooking your food or cleaning your house or washing your laundry or looking after your children, whatever. That's a completely different arrangement. Clearly, the person is an employee. So what would have happened over the last decade is that thousands of people were hired in some form or variation of this kind of a mode, to the point where we have 4,500 people working like that in all of these various modes. The cooks, the drivers, whoever who've been unestablished, the people who've been hired as contract for service or off service, and so on. And so when we talk about regularizing, we are saying, let us look at a person who's established. They're entitled to holiday, sick leave, all kind of leave, bereavement, maternity, paternity. They're entitled to increments. They're entitled to, when collective bargaining agreements are negotiated, increases in their salaries. And they're entitled to an unfunded pension. And I want to emphasize the unfunded. The law says taxpayers have to pay your pension.
Right, so non-contributory.
Unfunded, and I'm saying unfunded because the government isn't setting aside no special fund in a separate account to pay those pensions. You know, it is being paid straight to the consolidated fund, and I've made the point. And that's why it's also unfunded and not vested in you, because the stipulations that are set out say you must serve a certain period of time for you to be entitled to this pension. So if the period is 26 and a half years and you serve 25 and you die, your family ain't getting no pension because you haven't reached the 26 and a half. Right? But even if you reach the 26 and a half, if you have a government that decides, I have no intention of being a government that's subjecting myself to the law, as all of these governments over the last 40 years have, and they say they're not paying it, You got to go to court and fight. There isn't even a fund that you can try and go after or attach. In the current system that we're creating, we are segregating the funds out of the consolidated fund into a trust fund. And in law, a trust fund has certain things. The trust is held for the beneficiary's benefit. So it means the trustees are going to be responsible for managing that fund, not for the government benefit, but for the named employees who will each have their account number, etc., etc., etc. And after 5 years, the full amount, both the government and your contribution, will be vested in you and would even be transferable. So if you decided you don't want to work for government anymore, you can take that and move that pension to another pension fund.
It sounds very similar to what I use the term retirement savings plan.
Whatever term you want to call it, right? That's the goal. And before the 5 years, if you decided you wanted to leave, the savings that you would have made, you're entitled to get it back.
Okay.
Right.
Is this something that one would assume or hope, like the NIS was extended to all employees, that everyone has the opportunity to buy into this? I mean, so private sector as well.
That's absolutely the hope in the long run, because you see, the more people are on the pension, is the more you're pulling risk. Is the larger the pension investment sum becomes, and the larger you can make investments and get greater returns on it. So we are starting with those category of government employees that we've described. We are extending it to statutory bodies which don't have pensions and so on. And ultimately, we hope that particularly small businesses see this as an opportunity to join because what is going to happen is that the cost of managing the firm is for the next, I think we've agreed for the first 5 years that the government itself will even pay all of the administrative fees associated with managing the fund, so that it doesn't actually affect the fund itself, right? So it's an opportunity for you to pull expenses that otherwise you alone would have had to meet. So if you had a business that has 10 people working for you and you wanted to do a pension or retirement savings for them, and you went to a SAGICO or so on, you would have to pay them those administrative fees. If you join the government's, the public sector pension, you don't have to pay those fees. Right? When I say you don't have to pay it, it will be spread across all of the employers and so on employees who are part of it.
Who would be the trustees? Because this is an important part, because I know likewise there'll be investment and everything.
The legislation has clearly set out who the trustees would be. And so you would have government representatives, you'd have union representatives, employees representatives, you'd have people with very specific skill set, actuarial skill set, financial skill set, legal skill set. So we're in the process, and obviously the recommendations are going to have to come in. The unions are going to have to recommend. We are going to recommend persons. There are certain set categories that the law has set out, that the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance, etc., to clearly set out. So the legislation clearly sets out the criteria for the trustees, not the names of the trustees. Yeah. Those will have to be filled. We've already put out expressions of interest for investment, a fund manager, and for an administrative manager. These services are provided by insurance companies and pension administration fund companies locally and regionally, and so we will work through the next 90 days or so to get those contracts in place, to get the trustees appointed, and in the meantime we intend to start, in fact, operationalizing the pension, and so the Department of Public Administration will, in the meantime, provide the administrative support that we need to get us transitioning to that point.
How do you respond to some that say that this thrust is unconstitutional because you have public officers not being governed by the 1958 law?
Well, first of all, we have to understand law and rights. If you don't work for the government as of today, you're not a public officer, and you're not entitled to anything, and the government is free. So let me make it clear. The legislation is saying a person who is qualified and who meets the criteria of public officer based on the definition in the Constitution is entitled to a pension.
Right.
It isn't saying that everybody who works for the government is entitled to a pension. That's a completely different thing. If that was the case, all of the unestablished workers and so on who I talked to you about would have been able to sue the government successfully and say, I have to get a pension too. So the government is actually free to hire persons in any mode it wants. The question here is, are you going to exercise that discretion in a manner that is progressive and beneficial to your citizens and your employees, or are you going to use it in a manner that is abusive and unhelpful to them? And we're saying the mode of employment and in many instances, lack of any benefits has been abusive and unhelpful. It's not a question of whether it's constitutional or not. The government can, in fact, hire someone and say, these are the terms and conditions under which I hire you. I'm not paying you no pension. The Employment Act sets certain minimum things that you must comply with. So people are entitled to holiday. They're entitled to sick leave and so on. So you can't opt out of those. But they could say, for example, I'm hiring you and I'm not paying you a salary increase year in year out, because the law doesn't say every year you're entitled to a salary increase. Those are things you negotiate as part of an agreement. That doesn't entitle you to a pension. So in recognizing that, and in trying to reduce the anomalies between people who are doing the exact same kind of work, but one happens to fall within the definition of a public officer under the Constitution and one who does not, we are saying because you are doing the exact same type of work, that's not fair. But there's also a point, because we are saying obviously, and let me give an example. I said these contractors for services were told, here's your service fee, you pay your NIS. Right. We reverse that. Think about the consequences of what that is doing. You are young, you've just gotten a government work. So if for the last 10 years you've worked as a contractor for service and not paid NIS, not only don't have a government pension, you have no social security at all. You don't even have an entitlement to paid sick leave on the NIS, to maternity leave on the NIS. You're not going to get the NIS pension because you're not making any contributions. Because most of them would not have had the discipline to say, I'm going to pay NIS myself. So ask yourself, if a government elected by the people institutes that kind of policy on its own people, do you actually care what happens to them? Why? For what? What was the argument? You need to tell the IMF you employ more people than you really need? So that's the other issue with this system, is that you could go and hire 10,000 people if you want. Many times they're not doing anything. But you're trying to buy votes. You're trying to create a reservoir of votes. So you're bloating the government wage bill. You're attempting to hide it by saying they're not really employees. And more importantly, you could manipulate them. Because if you didn't believe what you were doing was right, they would have been able to go to GDB and get a loan. Because GDB would have had the confidence, or the banks would have had the confidence that they're indefinite employees, rather than employees who have a 6-month contract or a 12-month contract. Just before the elections, you recognize these people have been saying to you, this mode of employment you've put me in, a banker even watching me. And so you take $10 million and you give it to GDB and say, well, because the bank will lend these people money, you lend them money now. Because effectively it's a government institution. So the point I'm making is it good for workers, in addition to a salary, to have additional benefits like sick leave, like maternity leave, like paternity leave, like workman's compensation, like some form of retirement savings plan? The answer is absolutely yes. And should we do everything to try and get to that point where people have that? Yes. And should we do it in a manner that's sustainable? Yes. And that's the final point. And that's why I want to talk about the reality. And I want to say that to our citizens. There are a lot of people who will tell you about constitution and constitutionality and all kind of stories. You have to ask yourself, if you're one of the 4,500 plus persons who don't have a pension and who've not had one, where these people were over the last 10 years? Where were the advocacy for you? What did they do to highlight the situation or to try and solve the problem? I want to make it clear. This isn't costing this administration anything. Understand this. We are trying to give you something that you don't have in a sustainable manner that is yours. All of those who talk about constitution and constitutionality, they have theirs already 10 times over. And they have never sought to give you anything. So for me, this is not an issue about constitutionality. We are satisfied, having worked with consultants, having worked with the Attorney General's chambers, that there is nothing unconstitutional about the bill. The bill is not taking away anybody's rights. As I've said, the bill explicitly repeals the Pension Disqualification Act. The only people who have any right to a pension right now are these established public officers who are currently working. So a teacher who ain't yet working with the government 5 years from now has no rights.
So a teacher who's hired tomorrow,
Yes.
what is the regime they come under?
They will come under the new pension regime.
Will they be defined as a quote-unquote established worker, and hence why the new one as opposed to the old?
I'm saying to you, obviously, I just made the point of we're saying we have the right to hire you in terms of the appropriate mode, right? And therefore, this whole notion of established and non-established workers is a notion that ultimately, I'm going to use this word, will no longer be of any distinction with a meaning. Because to a large extent, the single almost defining act of this is these pension issues.
And then the other question is, who does the hiring? Is it Government of Grenada or would it be Public Service Commission? That new teacher being hired tomorrow?
Well, I would simply say the Government of Grenada. At the end of the day, all employees really and truly work for the Government of Grenada. The Public Service Commission is a commission or a mechanism that was created as part of the Constitution. And I'm going to use this word in layman terms to give some buffer to how you protect public officers from arbitrariness or political arbitrariness and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, the Public Service Commission doesn't pay you. Right? The Public Service Commission, I will use this word, is a more disciplinarian, hiring, firing, promoting, etc. But they're not your employer. It's the taxpayers of Grenada who pay you, and it's the government of Grenada who's employed you. Right? Even with language like a public officer, a public servant. Right? And we need to be careful that people don't tie us up into a lot of language issues that isn't dealing with the stark reality of what you're facing. And I want to re-emphasize this point. The more the government has to become the single biggest employer in a country, is the more the country will fail. Let me repeat that. The more the government has to become the single biggest employer in a country, the more the country will fail. Who pays the government? It's not the people who work for the government that pays the government. It's the rest of the population. It's the businesses. It's the private sector people. They are the ones who have to pay the taxes. And that is the taxes that we use to fund the government, and the government is you, if you work for the government. It's the services the government provides to the citizens, most of which are provided through you, policing, prison, etc. So if the only employees are government employees, then you have a failed state. And I think history has proven that attempts to make the state the sole employer everywhere in the world has failed. So we need to understand that this is not just about the pensions and so on. This is about the sustainability of the government and by extension the sustainability of the country. Right? And the other things we need to talk about is how we grow the private sector, how we get more and more people to actually see the government as a last resort for employment and the private sector as the first resort for employment. So I'm saying these things to say, and that's why I repeat it. There are always advantages and disadvantages to any system. And we have to compare the advantages and the disadvantages, and we have to take things in the context of time. 1958, the number of persons working for the government was probably a couple hundred. In 2025, it is perhaps 10,000 people. It is simply not possible or sustainable to ask taxpayers, after you've worked and earned your salary, to then take taxpayers' funds and simply give you another 75 or 80% of that salary after you're retired when you're not working. There's one point I want to make, and the public needs to appreciate that. Under the current system that we have, there are public servants who are going to retire, and they're going to be paid. When you combine the NIS pension and the current, what I call unfunded taxpayers' pension, where they are going to be paid more money on their retirement than when they were working. In some cases, as much as 120% of their salaries. And right next to them, if we don't proceed with this pension reform bill, are going to be people who, if we left the system in place, where they were told to pay their NIS and all these kinds of things, would be retiring with not a pension. Not an NIS one, not a government one.
All right. It's almost time for us to close. So a couple of rapid fire questions, if you would. So 1 or 2 sentences. The NMP leadership saga. What are your comments as we look towards the end of the year, the convention, and thereafter?
Well, I think you know I say no comment. I mind my own business.
Yes, and that was our beloved Prime Minister, the most honorable Deacon Mitchell there, explaining like a teacher this whole new pension plan, excuse me, this whole new pension scheme, providing simple details, information to us, explaining this thing in a very simple form. I hope you understand what this thing is all about. You're talking about 4,500 workers with government on contract. They do not have any pension to go home to upon retirement. The NNP was in power for a very, very long time. And what did they do to help? Hello? Yeah, right. I know it's a good friend who just called, and I decided to pick up that phone. What did they do to help these workers? And that's the question here. And what did the unions do over the many years when the NNP was in power to help these workers? Because if now you're playing that you care so much about the same contract workers, what did you do to help them? Because a lot of them retired back into poverty after working with government for many years with no pension. Now, this government is trying its best to provide a pension for them. The union wants to fight the government instead of joining with the government, instead of applauding the government, instead of commending the government for taking this bold step to provide a pension for these workers. And what I love about our Prime Minister, he said, look, this thing is not about all the big legal words, constitutionality and legality and so on. Let's come back to reality. The reality before us is that these people, if you don't do something to help them to get a pension, they will go home with nothing, as they were going home with nothing under the NNP. This thing is not rocket science. It's not rocket science. Properly explained. You know, yesterday I was saying to a friend, the union is acting like they're the employer. Do you know the union is only the bargaining agent for these workers? But they're acting now as though they're the employer of these workers. In fact, I heard the union donkey use words to the effect, well, the government went ahead and gave nurses $500 more on their salary and the doctors $1,000 more on their salary, and they did not come to us or they did not tell us. And I said, but what the hell is this? You're not the employee. You're not the employer. You're just the bargaining agent for. You should be happy that these workers get more on their salary, but don't act as though you're the employer. You're not paying these people. And if I am the employer, I can take steps to better the lives and condition of my employees. And that is exactly what the government is doing. But you see, the union is finding it very difficult to exist in this dispensation because you have a pro-worker government. The approach need to change. The union's approach when it comes to dealing with a pro-worker government cannot be the same approach as dealing with the NNP, who hated workers, who every Monday morning you have some strike, some protest, some march, some demonstration for something somewhere within the public service. So they were anti-worker. The NNP was anti-worker. So you had to become more militant. You had to become more controversial. You had to become, more active in terms of industrial actions and so on. So it's kind of understood. In that moment, during that period, that was called for militancy, advocacy, and that kind of stuff. But you're now dealing with a government who's your friend. You're now dealing with a pro-worker government who paid the pension. The NNP did not pay you the pension. You had to match in the hot sun for it, and they still did not pay you. But the NDC paid you your pension, $75.1 million. The NNP docked your salary. They go into your salary when you went out on the streets and match for your pension and gratuity. Right? They dock your salary. They take your money. The NDC came into power and they pay you back the money. The NDC introduced bi-monthly salary payments. So you don't have to hurt your head and worry. It's January, the month go hard, and you have to go all the way, scratch, crawl, ball to reach the end of the month, the 31st of January. You're getting your money on the 15th. That's a government that cares. The NNP never entertained regularization of workers. They were hiring people on contract. They never wanted you to be permanent. There was a public service in a public service. So when you called a strike, it was never successful because those on contract must go out and work, or else they fear they will be fired. What the NDC did, they came in and they started the regularization process. 404 workers have been regularized and made permanent, having security of tenure. The NDC did that. You didn't have to go out on the streets and march and protest for your increase. Under the NNP, you had to march, you had to protest, you had to demonstrate. You got 13% increase over a 3-year period with all the fringe benefits, all the benefits. You were in high praises to the government. Even fixed-term contract workers received increases in their salaries. The NDC cares about workers in this country. You have the minimum wage adjustment. This morning I heard some lady called that morning program on WFM talking about adjustment to your salary again. Well, by law, every 3 years, the government must adjust the minimum wage based on the rate of inflation. By law. The NNP broke the law for 20-something years. They never increase the minimum wage. But the NDC did that. The NDC did that. And now the NDC is addressing contract workers within the public service so that they can go home with a pension, so that they would not retire back into poverty. You don't need to be a genius to understand the basics of that. Just deviating a bit. This morning, my daughter, that's Zoe, she came in the studio because she was about to go to school. And because she accustomed to enter in the studio and saying morning to you, the viewers, she said this, but she's going to school for, leaving here about 7:20, thereabout. So my program starts or the program starts at 8. So I couldn't have her on because I'm not live. So I took a little video to show you, because you see, children are creatures of habit. She's accustomed to doing this. So she's this morning. What you want to do?
I'm going to see morning on the program.
You want to see morning on the program?
Yeah.
All right. We'll see morning now. See morning. She wants to say morning on the program.
Good morning.
And she say good morning, people.
You went to school?
Yes.
All right.
Right? So she going to
yeah?
school.
Okay.
Daddy love you.
Right?
All right.
Nice.
Folks,
So that was
she came this morning and she said she wanted to say good morning on the program.
right.
All right. Nice. Bye.
Right. So that was Zoe. She's a regular. She's a regular on the program, but she's now in school. So you would not see her on the morning time come in and say good morning. But this morning, she insisted. The first day of school, she, had to prepare and so on. She was excited. But the second day, she insisted. She wants to say good morning. And I just did a little video there. That's important. That's the love you get from Zoe. All right. Yeah. So I am saying all of this, folks, to say to you that if you are a reasonable thinking Grenadian, if you're a conscientious Grenadian, if you're a logically thinking Grenadian, you must conclude that we have a government that cares about the people of the country, who wants good for the people of the country. And that is very important. That is important. And look, I challenge any of the union leaders at any given time. Let us sit and compare. Andrew Lewis, who's in the Senate many a times talking rubbish, I challenge him. Let us sit and compare the amount of things that this government did for workers compared to the previous administration. Let's have a conversation. But you see, these people are so accustomed to doing the same stupid thing, the same damn old thing over and over again, thinking that they will get a different result. But it's the same result you're going to get. There must be a Damascus moment. There must be a transformation in your mind as union leaders. Right? You can't be the same old Paul, right? That became Saul and that, became blind and had to go X, Y, and Z and then became. You have to change. You're dealing with a more intelligent prime minister, a successful corporate lawyer with a young team of men and women who could run a good 400 meters, right? And they could still do a 60-meter dash. You're dealing with a different team. This is not the same old NNP with Keith Mitchell, who is almost what he's heading towards 80 years, 70 something, high 70s. I don't know, about 78, 79, somewhere up there. The guy is still reading with paper. The guy is still a paper tiger. When people are reading with their smartphone and their tablet computer, you have Emlyn Pest still with a paper reading. Come on. It's just a cake. It's just aged. Right? Saul, yes. Saul that then became Paul. Yes. So thank you very much, my good friend. And I thought of the error there. Saul, who became Paul. Nice. So I am saying all of this to say, folks, the union leaders are still living, existing in the NNP moment. You have to change your bad ways and understand that you're dealing with a friendly government. You're dealing with a government who cares about workers. You have one government who went into the United States or Canada and called nurses and doctors thieves. You have another government, which is the NDC government, who came into power and gave nurses $500 more on their salary and gave doctors $1,000 more on their salary. Come on. So that is not a good example of a government that cares versus one who doesn't. I mean, it's common sense. You do not need a degree to understand that. So the union leaders, they must change their bad ways, some of them, and understand you don't need to fight your friend. The government is your friend. The government is your ally. When last you went out in the streets demonstrating and protesting and beating drums and blowing bubuzelas? When last? I am asking the question. When last you, the unions, went out in the damn streets of St. George's and Grenville and Sautez and Hillsborough and Grove and Victoria? When last you went demonstrating, protesting, and fighting for some kind of increase or some kind of thing? Huh? You see, common sense is no longer common. Yeah, some of these people believe because they have a degree or two, they're smart or they're intelligent. If you want intelligence, go on the streets and speak to the simple people, and you would learn from them. You think I invented this tagline? Emlyn Pair is the NNP TV. Keith Mitchell is the remote control for that NNP TV. And Gregory Bowen is the manual for that NNP TV. I didn't invent that. I got it on the streets. I got it from ordinary, simple people. That's where I got it from. That's where you learn. That's where you learn. You have to understand. You can't think that you're so smart because you have some damn degree. You want to be smart? Right on the ground. Simple people, ordinary people. And I am saying, folks, if you look at this government and what they have done for the working people of this country, you have to give them thumbs up. And the union leaders must understand the mindset that they have must change, have to change. You're not dealing with Keith Mitchell anymore. You're not dealing with NNP anymore. NNP was your enemy. NNP never liked you. Everything you had to fight for under the NNP. The NDC is different. Different. Think. So stop being, as Lacey said, combative. Stop being this union leader who sees NDC as an enemy. Something has to be fundamentally wrong with you. So I am saying all of this to press home that message that the NDC cares about workers here in Grenada, Carriacou, and PT Martinique. The NDC cares about people. And we are not going back. We are not going back to NNP and that era. We're not. We are forging ahead. We are moving forward. That is exactly what we're going to do. I meet people every day and they tell me, they share their stories, the help that they got, and how their lives are being changed. for the better. The NNP will always be out there with their pundits, their goons, their surrogates, their zygotes, and their sycophants telling you that things are bad and things are this and crying foul and, always moaning, groaning, and that's what they will do. They're opposition. They want to get in. And they know that the battle is in the mind. And they repeat that over and over and over. After a while, you think that that's reality. All right? But the government is at work. And we have to commend them. We have to applaud them for the work that they're doing. Every day you see it. So this is good for workers. Very, very good for workers. And then, some of the union leaders, when you hear them, constitutionality and legality and utter rubbish. Huh? Where was that before? Where was that before? In fact, while I was listening to the Plead Your Cause program this morning, I said, but, before, there was no talk in this country about the regularization of workers, NDC that brought that about. There was no talk about pension payment and pension paid and no. They were fighting for their pension. But the NDC paid it. Right now the conversation is NDC paid the pension. Minimum wage adjustment. When last you heard that? NDC brought that about. NDC brought that about. And then they're going to do some work on the labor code and so on, giving women more maternity leave and paternity leave and men getting, leave and that kind of thing. Creating better conditions for workers, right? You want to hear more about that as we go through the first quarter of the year. So a lot is being done for our people. Look at the amount of programs that the NDC rolled out. And while the NDC is delivering and helping our people, the NNP continues to disintegrate. You heard about Nilon Franklin. He resigned from the NNP because he sees the NNP as stagnant. There's no room for growth in that party and organization.
Former opposition New National Party Senator Nilon Franklin has resigned from the party, a move confirmed by General Secretary of the NNP, Roland Bowler. Franklin was appointed to the Senate along with Nolan Cox and Katisha Douglas in 2022. However, Franklin and Douglas resigned in September this year. The reasons behind their departure remain unclear. In a resignation letter dated Wednesday, December 18, 2024, Franklin expressed gratitude for his time as a senator, stating, "I have become a better Grenadian because of my experience in the Senate." However, he also wrote that he no longer sees a path for personal growth or continuity within the NNP. His resignation follows the party's convention, where Franklin was notably absent. It remains unclear what Franklin's next political move will be. However, he did signal his intention to explore new opportunities that will allow him to continue serving in different capacities. Sources also indicate to our news desk his intention to continue his educational pursuits. His departure leaves the NNP with Nolan Cox, the newly appointed deputy political leader during the party's recently held convention, as the only remaining senator from the 2022 appointments.
Yeah, so the NNP continues to disintegrate. Real problems still in the NNP. And people are now asking a very important question. Why is it that you had confidence in Emlyn Pear, who is the NNP TV, to be the leader of the NNP, but when it comes to being the leader of the opposition, she is not qualified to be that. She's not competent enough to be that. You don't have confidence in her being the leader of the opposition. What you're trying to shield? A diplomatic passport? What you're trying to shield? Immunity? What you're trying to shield? And that's the question. What you're trying to shield? Immunity? What you're trying to shield? A diplomatic passport? Because the woman, the NNP TV, was made the leader of the NNP. And the remote control is still the leader of the opposition in the lower house of parliament. Make that make sense. That Matson, something ain't right. And reasonable people are beginning to ask the question, okay, you made her the leader of the party, and we know she's the NNP TV. You remain as the chairman of the party, as the NNP remote control, the remote control for that NNP TV. And you remain as the leader of the opposition in the lower house of parliament. So she's not even worthy to be the leader of the opposition. So why then make her the leader of your party? Then you're still the leader of the party. It's just a name change. This, look, something ain't right about the NNP. Because we know that Emlyn Perry doesn't have what it takes to lead a country. We know that. And we know that she was just placed there. And when it comes closer to the election, she'll be removed. So we know. We know. But come on. You put her in as leader of the party, but when it comes to leader of the opposition, she's not good enough for that. So you remain as the leader of the opposition. But we have to call on this guy to give her the position of leader of the opposition. Yes, we need to force him out of that position. We need to pressure him. And those MPs on the government side need to call him out in the parliament. They need to do that. Because it's an embarrassment on the part of Emlyn and the NNP. It's an embarrassment. You put the woman in the position, when it comes to the position of the leader of the opposition, you don't want to give her. What that is about? What that is about, folks? What you shielding? What you want to protect? Does that office comes with immunity? Does that office comes with a diplomatic passport? I want to know. I really want to know. Folks, I want to wish you all the best for the day. I will be back with you tonight in the hub, starting from 8 in the p.m.